Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Ekaterina Hartmann, and I'm the Director for Legal and Regulatory Affairs at the European Gaming and Betting Association. I will start my presentation now, and if you have any questions, you can just feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will get back to those towards the end of the presentation. So who are we? Who is EGBA? EGBA is a Brussels-based trade organization. We have been in Brussels for more than 16 years, and our members are leading online gambling operators that are established and licensed in the European Union. I will give you a number of data in the next slide. So while I do so, please keep in mind that this data is based on EGBA members, and our members make approximately 33% of Europe's online gambling market, which amounts to 13.5 billion online GGR or gross gaming revenue. 8 of our members are operators. We also have 2 associate members who are payment service providers. And we also work with the other 22 national gambling associations. Our members hold 321 licenses to offer online gambling services across EU countries. This is just a map to give you a little bit of an idea of the license of the countries in which we have licenses. You can see that I don't have this map here, but just 10 years ago, the map was a lot smaller in terms of license numbers. And we have seen definitely a big expansion towards the possibility for online gambling operators to acquire licenses in many more jurisdictions. Now, if we focus on anti-money laundering and what you are here for today, in 2024, our member operators underwent 142 licensing audits. Out of those, 48 were AML audits, and these are conducted by gambling and financial regulatory authorities around Europe. This has gone up since we last collected data for 2022. And this also shows an ever-increasing focus on AML and compliance. We expect that this number will continue to grow as the importance of money laundering, of anti-money laundering measures increases. And also to give you an idea of this massive increase, in 2024, our member operators submitted 31,000 suspicious transaction reports to national financial intelligence units. Just as a comparison, in 2022, so just 2 years before, this number was 16,000. So we have, as you can see, it's around double that number in just 2 years. This also shows the importance of the fighting anti-money laundering by obliged entities that are not only banks or financial institutions, but also handle customers and are also obliged entities under EU AML law. Now, the EU anti-money laundering package. Now, what is currently the situation? So gambling is covered by the fourth anti-money laundering directive, and it is a fantastic example of the way that horizontal European legislation affects our sector. It is just one of several We can also add many more. We can add the GDPR, we can add the EEA, the European Accessibility Act. But today we're talking about anti-money laundering. AML has been a key focus for EGBA, and I personally joined EGBA when the fourth anti-money laundering directive was being discussed, and I've been working on that ever since. And already at the time, we welcomed the inclusion of our sector in the fourth AMLD. However, since then, many things have changed, and the EU as a whole, so all the institutions relevant to this process, the European Commission, the European Parliament, the European Council, they all agreed that the approach of having a directive does not work. And they have called for a change to ensure that the level of AML rules and regulations is consistently high across the EU, due to the fact that some member states have not correctly implemented the fourth AMLD. Now, so what was to be this change? This change was the AML package, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But in the meantime, it's also important to underline that there is continued enforcement of the fourth AMLD and the fifth AMLD via infringement cases, with important cases still ongoing and even new ones being opened. Because this is one of the European Commission's priorities is enforcement, together with, as we are waiting for the new rules to come into effect. Or some of them, because some of them already have come into effect. Now, in July 2021, a new legislative package consisting of 4 proposals was introduced. And the first of those was the regulation establishing Amla, the Authority for Anti-Money Laundering and Countering the Financing of Terrorism. Amla should start its work in 2026, and this new European agency will directly supervise the 40 biggest banks. And it is also going to be the way that it will be financed via this direct supervision. It will be extremely important, not only because of its direct supervision, but also because it will be doing a massive amount of regulatory and implementing standardization work that will introduce new guidance and a lot of both level 2 and level 3 legislation. So one such example is standardizing forms for suspicious transaction reports. The work, and if you actually read the anti-money laundering regulation, you can see how many times it refers to further guidance to be issued by Amla. This process has not waited for Amla to start working in 2026. In fact, it has already begun. And the European Banking Authority has been working on a document on customer due diligence. And it is, well, the consultation just finished. This one is aimed at the financial sector. However, there were already some questions that were referring to the non-financial sector as well. And we have gotten a confirmation that they plan on launching a similar guidance and a similar consultation for the non-financial sector. Another key function of AMLA will be around coordination and cooperation between FIUs. So there's the possibility for non-financial supervisors to create supervisory colleges, and those will be very effective, or it's hoped that they will be very effective in situations of cross-border money laundering suspicions that go, especially those that go across multiple jurisdictions. And AMLA is also to mediate between national authorities on implementation issues. The competition of where this new agency will be located was very intense, and out of the 10 cities that applied, Frankfurt, Germany has won the seat. And the reason why this was a number of factors were taken into consideration when selecting the location, as its capacity for recruitment, from when there can be an operational readiness, training opportunities, and also very importantly, whether AML risks are adequately addressed in that member state. Another part of this four legislation package was the sixth anti-money laundering directive. It is primarily addressed to national supervisory authorities, and it will aid in coordinating their tasks and ensuring enhanced cooperation. It contains provisions that need to be transposed by the member states in order to keep the flexibility of national AML systems. So that is why it was still a directive and not a regulation. Directive grants more power to national FIUs to analyze AML cases. In particular, immediate access to financial, administrative, and law enforcement information, including, for example, on beneficial ownership, bank accounts, and real estate registers. In terms of beneficial ownership, there's a much bigger focus on that in the new package, both in the AMLD and in the AMLR. And the AMLD establishes the type of information that will need to be verified to establish an ultimate beneficial owner. And further, EU and national risk assessment will remain a key asset for AML CFT. And here I can also add something that I haven't put on the slides, but it's interesting to know that the system of the European SNRA or the will now be changed. So the SNRA, the supranational risk assessment, is a risk assessment done at EU level that aims to look at different risks associated with certain sectors. And then national risk assessments base themselves on this supranational risk assessment. And it will be an interesting change because now there will be a different type of risk assessment in 4 years that will be done for the EU as a whole, and work will be ongoing on that. Now, third part of the AML package of the transfer of funds regulation. It is basically a recast of that. The important thing about it is that it's the first time that cryptocurrencies are in the scope of AML legislation. Also, anonymous crypto asset wallets have been prohibited in the EU, and EU rules will now align with FATF standards on crypto assets. Why did I choose to focus on this when it comes to the transfer of funds? It's because the risks of cryptocurrency are currently being related a lot to gambling by the supranational risk assessment, which is actually something that we disagree with based on the fact that actually the vast majority of the regulated European industry does not accept cryptocurrency because this is also a licensing conditions in the condition in the vast majority of the member states. But that is a very, very big topic that we're not covering with this presentation. So we can move on to the AMLR. This is what concerns us the most. So we're moving from a directive to a regulation, which means that it will apply in its entirety. Unlike a directive, it does not need to be transposed into national legislation. So there will be full harmonization on one side, and on the other side, particularly for our sector, hopefully there will be less gold plating. A regulation will strengthen the fight against money laundering. Many member states had not fully implemented or incorrectly implemented the fourth and the fifth AMLD. And this was also, as I discussed in the beginning, part of why it was felt that a revision was needed. Gold plating in several European member states on AML has been an issue for a number of years for the sector. And of course, this wide divergence in AML rules across multiple member states currently brings enormous compliance and administrative costs. So, from the perspective of the international gambling operators, having a single rule book is going to be beneficial in terms of compliance. Now, so what about gambling? Now, in its original proposal, the European Commission proposed to keep the existing approach when it comes to online gambling, particularly around the thresholds for customer due diligence. And ultimately, even though there were a lot of intense debates both in the European Council and the European Parliament, this threshold of 2,000 euros was kept. So we can refer to Article 19, Paragraph 5 of the AMLR, application of CDD measures, and it's clearly said that obliged entities shall apply customer due diligence measures upon the collection of winnings, wagering of a stake, or both, when carrying out transactions amounting to at least 2,000 euros, or the equivalent in national currency, whether the transaction is carried out in a single operation or through linked transactions. There's also changes when it comes. So unlike with CDD, there are some changes to exemptions. There are certain types of gambling that cannot be exempted. Previously, those were only offline casinos, as they handle large amounts of cash, and cash is considered the most risky when it comes to money laundering. Now, this has been expanded to also cover sports betting services, online gambling, and it is actually also worth noting that exempting gambling services so far was considered as the criteria for exempting services so far was considered as too lenient. So a more thorough assessment will now be required to be made by member state and new factors will be included to take into account when granting an exemption to a sector. Now, on the one hand, we have gambling, and on the other hand, we have so many of the rules that are very horizontal in nature when it comes to AML. And those horizontal rules were not very precise and not so extensive under the AMLR before. Under the AMLD before, but in the AMLR, this has changed significantly. So there are really a lot more specific rules that need to be considered and implemented. And this is even before we will have all this guidance from Amla that I talked about before this level 2 and level 3 legislation. And some of those horizontal rules that are going to be applicable to all obliged entities are several, and I've chosen to mention just a few because there really are many. First of all, the list of obliged entities is going to be expanded to include new sectors now. So for the first time, crypto asset service providers will be included, but also football clubs, investment migration operators, etc. Now, the harmonization of customer due diligence governance measures, such as internal policies and procedures for risk management, is outlined in much greater detail. And as I already mentioned, it's further subject to further rules that are being worked on by the European Banking Authority in preparation for Amla. More specific and detailed provisions are also laid down on the identification of the customer and the verification of the identity of said customer. The rules on simplified and enhanced customer due diligence are strengthened and precised. Um, it remains so, but obliged entities must verify the customer's identity and transactions and report any suspicious activities to the national FIUs. Also, the rules on the identification of suspicious transactions have been precised. This is, I think, especially valuable, specifically in our sector, given the fact that there is such a wide divergence in reporting across the EU when it comes to AML, and any sort of coherence in the rules on that point, I think, is probably greatly appreciated by compliance teams. Now, also requirements on customer risk analysis. We talked already in the sixth AMLD about the strengthening on the rules of beneficial ownership. So here in the AMLR, the trend continues. Much stricter rules are being implemented. And then a question that has been resolved has been around data protection rules and AML rules, because there is much discussion around where GDPR ends and where AML begins, or the other way around. So there is some more clarity awarded to that. Further, now this is not really applicable for online gambling, but for physical types of gambling. Large cash transactions have been capped at 10,000 euros. And now the AMLR will allow member states to set even lower maximum limits. And also, this is coupled with the requirement of obliged entities to identify the persons that are conducting such large cash transactions between 3,000 and 10,000 euros. Further, the topic of who is a politically exposed person is dealt with in much more detail. So who they are, how is it determined whether they're a PEP or not? Current PEP, are they a current PEP? Are they a former PEP? All of this has also been further clarified. Again, on beneficial ownership, the regulation specifies that it will be based on ownership. And also, you need to analyze all the beneficial owners of legal entities and not just some of them. Obliged entities must apply enhanced due diligence measures to occasional transactions and business relationships that involved high-risk third countries, and this will be assessed by the European Commission based on FATF listings. So this is the AML package, but so we know, but what do we not know? So in a way, what is next? Now, the AMLR will apply as of 10th of July, 2027. Every obliged entity should already be looking at the AMLR and should already be looking at how they will implement this new package, because it will be a very massive undertaking for compliance teams. We as EGBA will be helping and are already helping our members to do that. We have we are and we will be setting further implementation workshops to help with the questions around how do we implement it for our sector? Because one of the things that EGBA really works on in Brussels is to make sure that the voice of the sector is heard, because a lot of this horizontal legislation is not really meant for us. It is not written with gambling in mind. AML legislation is written with banks in mind and at best other financial institutions. So other obliged entities such as gambling or real estate, diamonds, lawyers, notaries, etc., are very often just an afterthought. So our role as EGBA in Brussels has been to make sure that what is being written can be applied to our sector. But then how is it going to be applied is a whole different question. So we're putting our members together to try and figure out those difficult questions. Now, overall, as a cross-border business, the effect of the unification of the rules is going to be enormously beneficial. We know that despite the AML directives, again, I mentioned that the situation with AML is very fragmented and it leads to huge compliance costs. The implementation will, however, not be without its challenges. The further strengthened rules on enhanced customer due diligence are going to be a challenge for most compliance teams. Now, we know that already in certain countries, conducting enhanced customer due diligence has a very real, a very severe effect on customer retention. And just because sometimes customers do not want to respond to source of wealth or source of fund requests does not mean that they are actively laundering money. It also has a lot to do with national culture. So it's much less of a problem in the north of Europe, but in the south of Europe, or specifically in certain countries, and I can mention Italy and France, customer retention is very low. So that can be something that we can expect may potentially become more aggravated. Now, uh, EGBA is also, we're awaiting eagerly level 2 legislation. It's going to bring a lot of much needed standardization. And it's from our perspective, level 2 legislation should follow closely level 1 legislation and not go beyond what level 1 legislation, so what the legislator in terms of the European Parliament and the European Council has decided. And this was a sentiment that was also expressed by the European Commissioner for Financial Services, Maria Luisa Albuquerque. Now, Amla will be very important for our industry, again, because of the amount of standardization and technical regulation it will provide. And we can expect that for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we will be getting new standardization, new guidance. We will be following those, and it will be a very important, a continuation of this very important work on AML. And what we need to continue doing as an industry and what EGBA intends to do is continue to ensure that our voice is represented in technical discussions. Again, AML policy is very much geared to banks and financial institutions, but other industries should not be an afterthought. And any technical discussions need to include all obliged entities and give us the opportunity to participate in these discussions. Now, just I wanted again to mention reporting requirements. We discussed already the high compliance costs. The task of Amla to standardize the common template for reporting is very eagerly awaited, at least for the online gambling sector. Again, I mentioned this already, the work on the regulatory technical standards on the information necessary for the performance of CDD, that is already ongoing. and EGBA has been involved in these discussions. So overall, much of the standardization work expected from Amla will be decisive in how the AMLR is implemented. Now, also, we should not forget that any new legislation, it can bring unintended consequences. One such unintended consequences for our sector and for other sectors is the incidence of de-risking by banks. For those of you who are not familiar, de-risking, so each bank has its own risk profile, and this risk profile is also can be higher or lower based on the types of customers that they serve. And since gambling is considered risky, a bank that accepts gambling companies as customers is considered to be riskier, so it leads to an increase in their risk profile. Some banks choose to de-risk such clients, essentially not to serve them. However, this brings with while convenient for the bank, it carries a lot of complications for online gambling operators and their access to banking services. This is I don't know if I should really be calling it. It's not something that's new. It's something that the legislators, at least in Brussels, are very well aware of because we have discussed this multiple times. But it's not only our industry, also other obliged entities that are deemed as high risk, such as non-governmental organizations, also face the same issues, particularly if they work with charitable work, if they do charitable work in jurisdictions that are considered high risk. Also, overall, we as EGBA always worked for increasing the level of compliance for our sector. And that's why we also believe that AML compliance should be high across the board and for all obliged entities. And this is why we worked on creating the EGBA AML guidelines. Now, in addition to legislation, self-regulation is critical to show the industry's vital role in anti-money laundering. And to prove our commitment, we developed a set of guidelines. These guidelines are based on the risk-based approach as have been adopted by the European Union and the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which for those of you actually who are not familiar, this is the international AML body. EGBA guidelines have already taken into account the new AML package. However, this was at its stage as a proposal, and we have not yet implemented all of the new changes that were voted for in the final version. However, there are not that many. So already being compliant with the EGBA AML guidelines is a very good stepping stone to being able to work on your internal, if you're an operator, to work on your compliance with the new AML package. Now, the guidelines will cover the whole customer journey and will continue to include practical guidance on how to conduct customer and business risk assessments, how to conduct customer due diligence, and how to improve cooperation during the process. Suspicious transaction reporting requirements, the relationship between anti-money laundering and safer gambling, also the relationship between anti-money laundering and sports integrity, record-keeping requirements, third-party reliance, and outsourcing. And one of the interesting things is that we are actually planning on further expanding those. not only with what is included in the AMLR, what will need to be amended or further precised, but also once a year we run a process to ensure that our members are complying. Our members and other signatories are complying with their obligations under the AML guidelines. And we have a big annual meeting where we meet to discuss the reports that members submit to prove their commitment and to show how they have worked on implementing the guidance in the past year. And we already had our meeting this year, so we are planning on further expanding the guidance with a lot of different points. So here is the moment to say that if you're an operator and you would like to sign up for the guidelines, it is absolutely free. You do not have to be an EGBA member, and you will have access to our annual meeting and the discussions. And as we're starting on revising the AML guidelines, you can actually be part of the process yourself and your colleagues, and you can help shape the sector's best practices on anti-money laundering. We are planning already, I can share a little bit of inside information that we're going to be doing, let's say, some things like expanding our section on payments, on outsourcing, on lists of documents that are needed for conducting AML, etc., etc. And maybe I should also mention that we have received very positive feedback on the guidelines from several FIUs. So Malta, Sweden are two I can directly mention, and the European Commission itself. Now, also, our affiliate members are also welcome to participate in that process. So, for example, we're going to look forward to their input on payment risks and relations with payment service providers. If you're interested in signing up to the guidelines, please contact me and we can try to arrange that. Thank you very much. And now I will be answering the questions. I see that I have several questions here, actually 9. And we can start. So the first question is, how will the AMLR impact the operations of small to medium-sized online gambling operators? Well, the impact will be the same as of big gambling operators because it doesn't matter whether you're a big operator or a small operator. Everyone will need to apply the new rules as of 2027. And probably the impact on the operations of smaller companies is going to be even bigger. Also because in terms of several issues that I mentioned, enhanced customer due diligence, customer retention would be one. Also, perhaps in the shorter run, you will need an increased focus from your compliance teams and your AML teams on how to implement the AMLR, which, as we are working on this in the moment, I can say that it is not going to be it's not an easy process. So I would very strongly advise any compliance teams to already start looking at the AMLR and what changes will need to be made, and to also seek guidance from your national regulator. In some countries, that would be the gambling regulator. In other countries, it will be the financial intelligence unit. When it is the financial intelligence unit, Based on our experience, it can be even more difficult as you would also need to do a lot of education to them sometimes around the policies, but the more guidance that can be received, the better. Okay, then the next question, to what extent will Amla have direct oversight over gambling operators, and how might this differ between land-based and online? Um, for the moment, Amla is supposed to have direct oversight only over the 40 biggest banks in the EU. So it is not previewed that they will have direct oversight over gambling regulators. For the moment, this will remain with national regulators for the gambling sector. And however, um, AMLA may decide to start directly supervising any sector that they deem especially high risk. So there is the theoretical possibility that AMLA may start direct oversight of the gambling sector if it is considered that we're not doing well enough as a sector. I also mentioned there will be the possibility to for AMLA to be assisting national supervisors in cross-border cases. So when it comes to online or to land-based that have an online presence in several jurisdictions, we can see that there will be an effect there because of increased coordination. Next question. What role does data minimalization play in AMLR data collection practices? That is a very good question. Now, I can, sorry, I think my questions, yes, sorry. And now that is a bit more of a technical question, unfortunately, so it is not, I cannot really answer that accurately. I am not an MLRO or so I can, that is a little bit too technical, so I'm afraid I cannot answer that one. Next question, what measures should organizations implement to ensure the confidentiality and security of personal data in AMLR procedures? Now that is a very good question, and it has been subject to a lot of discussion on how to balance the needs of confidentiality and personal data in AML. However, the way it was largely done now is that AMLR almost kind of AML almost trumps the security of personal data. So the access to data for AML purposes has been firmly enshrined as a legitimate interest. And it has been given, well, in my opinion at least, very much the precedence over the protection of personal data. I mean, this is a little bit of a personal opinion as well, because, and you can hear a lot of, there were many discussions in Brussels over where the correct kind of the correct line lays between those two. And unfortunately, we don't have the time today to cover all of these discussions, but basically, that is the outcome. Next question. Best practices for stakeholder collaboration between operators, regulators, and legal experts to adapt to the new AML reality. Stakeholder collaboration, we find it extremely important, and that's why we have the EGBA AML guidelines. I'm not aware of any other stakeholder collaboration on AML that exists in the EU for the industry at the moment. So EGBA is trying to fill that void, first of all, by ensuring that signatories have the opportunity to discuss between each other and to collaborate on what those best practices are, as we will be revising the EGBA guidelines. And we also will be probably conducting our own discussions with regulators and with experts as we are revising the new revised version of the EGBA ML guidelines. So as far as I'm aware, our initiative is the only one. So if you're working for an operator and you would like to sign up to the EGBA ML guidelines, you can contact me, and you can also find on our website the text and the guidelines themselves. So please check those out. Okay, next question. What does the future look like for cross-border cooperation and data sharing between AMLA and national regulators? Um, well, there will be a lot more data sharing. There will be an establishment of working groups led by AMLA on specific cross-border cases in specific situations where there is a suspicion of a crime. However, overall, AMLA will be facilitating also these kind of exchanges in a more general sense as well, by working towards rules on how to cooperate better and procedures, and AMLA will be leading on those as well. So we will see more closer cooperation between national regulators under the hat of AMLA. Next question. How can the gambling industry get involved in shaping the upcoming level 2 and 3 legislation? Well, that is a very good question. I don't think that it's really a task for individual operators. We, as an industry association, will be engaging with AMLA on all of these upcoming level 2 and level 3 legislations. And in fact, EGBA has already been in discussions with the European Banking Authority on this consultation on customer due diligence that I was talking about earlier. So we as EGBA are involved with that, and we are hoping to be able to continue representing the interests of our industry as we did during the discussions on the AML package here in Brussels, who were ongoing for several years and who were very, very, very intense. So that is the work that EGBA, part of the work that EGBA does in Brussels. Regarding the presentation itself, as far as I know, because the next question is, will the presentation be available and on which channel? I think there will be a video recording that will be made available to you, not the presentation itself, but the video recording of this whole session. So you can rewatch this. It will be made available by the organizers and also by EGBA. I think on our social media. Now, next question. How can the industry guard against de-risking by banks under the new strengthened AML rules? That is a very, very good question. And it is also a question that we have been asking for the last couple of years as we were discussing these problems with the European Parliament and with the European Commission several times. We've also spoken on events on the topics here in Brussels. Overall, it is very important to make this risk known also on a national level, because a lot of this is actually in the jurisdiction also of national regulators. And several member states have already taken, like Belgium is one example, have taken this issue into account, but others have not. It is very important that banks are made aware of the fact that we're a respectable industry. A lot of the work that EGBA does is also education, but not only of regulators, not only of European institutions, but also individual private actors. However, this is not a task that we can possibly try to solve. It would be very, very helpful in terms of de-risking if we can ensure that risk assessments, both on the European level and on the national level, consider the gambling sector as a lower level of risk. Because also some of the reasons about why it is considered to be very risky currently in those risk assessments have to do with crypto, which is not something that's valid in every member state. So we always encourage national gambling regulators before national FIUs, before they work on their national risk assessments, to consider the fact that there can be de-risking, that it is very, very harmful, and to consider whether all of the risk factors are really applicable to their jurisdiction. Because I can directly give one example. If in the jurisdiction X, there is no possibility to play with crypto for licensed operators and players playing on the licensed market, then why would we consider that to be a high risk level factor? So there needs to be a lot of work needs to be done still regarding de-risking, a lot of education. And that's why we believe also showing that we're a serious industry via the EGBA ML guidelines, via a very high compliance across the board is very beneficial in the short and medium term as well. Next question is, what support or resources which will EGBA offer to help both members and non-members prepare for the 2027 implementation? Well, for the process that we are doing on AMLR implementation, is only for EGBA members. It is not open to the public. So if it is only for members. However, so if you're interested in becoming an EGBA member, that's always somewhere where you can see value added. However, if you do not want to be an EGBA member, I firmly think that looking at the EGBA ML guidelines and making sure that your company complies with those, you're already one giant step forward towards complying with the AMLR. And also the fact that we will be looking at the AMLR and the EGBA ML guidelines, it will mean that the updated guidelines will be fully in line with the best practices and with the new legislation. So that is one valuable and completely free resource. And again, if you would like to sign up for the guidelines, then you can even participate in the process of revision of the guidelines, which gives a lot of knowledge completely for free. And then final question, what training or risk resources are necessary for staff involved in AML risk assessments? That is a very good question regarding trainings. I know from EGBA members that they're constantly increasing their trainings for staff and exposing a lot more staff to AML trainings. However, what kind of specific training resources, I cannot really point you to anything further. But again, making sure that your internal procedures align with the EGBA ML guidelines and that staff are trained. And your trainings also include best practices, I think is a great step forward. And finally, how can software vendors best prepare for the changes? That is a very good question. It is, again, a little bit too specific for me to answer, but I don't know also what type of vendor specifically you're referring to because there are different types of vendors. So if you're a payment service provider, obviously the AML rules are going to have a very, very big impact. I know software vendor, so I don't know exactly what kind of software you mean, but it it is very important to be aware and prepare for the changes. And then specifically, it would depend obviously on your business. And I think there I may have time just for one more question. And if there are no further questions, we can also end here. So I'll give a couple of seconds opportunity if everyone has an additional question. I don't see any additional questions, so I can thank you all for your attention. And my email is on the screen. So if you're interested in joining the EGBA ML guidelines, please contact me. And thank you very much for your attention. With this, we can close the webinar.